3 days ago, my hearing came back. No warning, no signs, just clarity. After weeks of silence, the world returned. One sound at a time. The beeping heart monitor. The footsteps in the hallway. The soft scrape of a pen on paper. And then her voice. My daughter. The first words I heard after weeks of deafness weren't "I love you" or "Glad you're okay, Dad." No, they were, "That old burden is back home again." A pause, then laughter. At least the insurance money helped. Now we just have to keep pretending until the doctor signs off. I was still standing at the front door, still holding the doorknob, still hoping that the woman I raised was someone worth believing in. I wanted to call out, to confront her, to collapse, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned back against the wall, heart pounding, breath shallow, and I listened to every word, every lie, every plan they thought I'd never hear. They thought they were planning my future, but they had no idea. I was already planning theirs. This is not just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when the wrong person underestimates the quiet one in the room, the one they called a burden. Because in the next 3 days, I would show them exactly what a burden can become. Thomas Reed wasn't the kind of man who spoke much, but when he did, people listened. For nearly 40 years, he worked as a structural engineer, the kind of job where every inch mattered and silence meant precision. He built schools, bridges, homes, but the thing he poured most of himself into was his family. After his wife Margaret passed away from cancer 5 years ago, Thomas filled the silence with routine. Mornings started at 6 a.m., coffee black. Walks around his quiet Bozeman neighborhood, fixing things that didn't need fixing just to keep his hands from remembering what they'd lost. His house wasn't big, but it was his. Bought with decades of sweat, lunch breaks skipped, and overtime no one asked for. It was the place where his children took their first steps, where his wife read every morning by the window, where he said goodbye. Thomas never remarried. He never even thought about it. Instead, he devoted everything to his children, especially Emily, his firstborn, his pride. She went to art school in Portland. He paid every dollar. She married a man named Brad. He paid for the wedding, too. He didn't complain. He never asked for anything in return. All he wanted was to be loved the way he loved them. But love, as Thomas would learn, can turn quiet, and sometimes it turns cruel. I built a life for them, brick by brick. But somewhere along the way, they stopped looking at me like I was home. Emily Reed was the kind of daughter that made neighbors jealous. Straight A's, homecoming queen, scholarships, a natural smile that could melt through Montana snow. To Thomas, she was everything Margaret had prayed for. Smart, bold, independent, the first in their family to go out of state for college. He remembered the day she left for Portland. Her bags packed neatly. Art books, paintbrushes, dreams. Margaret had cried. Thomas didn't. He just stood in the driveway waving until the car disappeared over the hill. He worked double shifts to cover her tuition, never told her he skipped meals some months. Never mentioned the shoes with holes in them or the furnace he fixed himself to save a few hundred. Because Emily was his legacy. Her future was his blueprint. And for a while, it seemed worth it. She called every Sunday, sent postcards, brought home a fiancé named Brad, handsome, polished, polite. Thomas paid for the wedding, of course, no questions asked. He even gave them a down payment for their first condo in Seattle. To him, that wasn't sacrifice. That was fatherhood. But slowly the calls got shorter. The visits came less. And when they did come, Emily seemed more distracted, more impatient. She started calling him Tom instead of Dad. Said it sounded more grown up. He laughed it off. Until one day she said, "You wouldn't understand how hard it is to carry people like you, Dad." That was the first crack. The first time Thomas felt like a guest in the house he'd built. I gave her everything, and still, I became something she had to carry. The fall. Thomas slipped on black ice. Everything changed. A fractured hip, a minor concussion, and temporary hearing loss the doctors called manageable. He couldn't hear the phone ring, couldn't hear the nurse when she whispered, "You're lucky your daughter came." Emily flew in the next day, or so she said. She hugged him at the hospital, kissed his cheek, and said all the right things. "Don't worry, Dad, I'll take care of everything." He believed her. Of course he did. Back home, Emily took over. She moved into the guest room, put a whiteboard on the fridge with reminders, take meds at 7 a.m., stay hydrated, rest. She bought a new set of curtains, cleaned the kitchen, changed the locks, said it was for safety. And when he asked where Brad was, she smiled and said, "He'll visit once things settle." Thomas nodded, grateful, silent, but something felt off. Emily was always near, but never present. She moved through the house like a manager, not a daughter. She took his mail, sorted his medications, whispered too often near closed doors. And when she thought he wasn't looking, she took photos of documents. His will, his insurance, the house deed. At first, Thomas thought it was just a precaution. Good intentions with sharp edges. But one night he woke up to whispers, muffled voices behind the guest room door. And though his ears were failing, his instincts were not. There's a silence that isn't peace. It's the kind that hides footsteps behind your back. The morning it happened, Thomas was reaching for his coffee. The mug slipped, it shattered. And he flinched, not from the mess, but from the sound. It was faint, muffled, but real. The first sound he'd heard in weeks. He stood still in the kitchen, heart pounding harder than any painkiller could stop. Then, a clock ticking. Then, a bird outside the window. His hearing was coming back. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough. He didn't tell Emily. Not that morning, not the next. Because hours later, he heard something else. He was walking down the hallway when it happened. Emily didn't see him. She was in the den, back-turned, phone to her ear. No Brad, he still doesn't know. Doctor says we can use cognitive decline to prove incompetence. Thomas froze. Yes, I already took the papers from the safe. Just need that damn signature. After that, Silver Pines takes him, we sell the house. There was a pause, then laughter. Not nervous laughter, not tired. Cruel, cold, calculated. Thomas didn't move, didn't breathe. He simply stepped back carefully, quietly, and closed the door to his bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling, mind racing. This wasn't care, it was a countdown. Not for his recovery, but for his removal. They thought I couldn't hear them, but I heard enough to hear them clearly for the first time. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. Every word Emily said played in his head like broken glass tumbling downstairs. Silver Pines has a 6-month wait list. If we get the evaluation now, he's out by April. The deed is clean, no second lien. We sell it fast, move to Napa. She sounded like a real estate agent, not a daughter. Brad's voice came through the phone speaker. Make sure he signs the power of attorney. Without that, it's messy. Emily chuckled. He's barely coherent some days. I'll just say it's a medical form. He trusts me. Thomas sat in the hallway. In the dark, unmoving, unblinking, he watched as his daughter passed the doorway, carrying his files, his prescriptions, his future, like it was office paperwork. He saw the wedding photo on the wall, her in white, him standing beside her beaming. He had paid for that smile, for that dress, for the life she now used against him. He could have screamed. He could have kicked them out that second. But he didn't, because in that moment, Thomas realized something deeper than betrayal. Emily didn't hate him. She didn't even see him. Not as a father, not as a man, not as anything, but an asset. They were writing me off before I even got a chance to say goodbye. 2 days after Thomas heard the truth, he made himself breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee, black, just like always. Emily came in acting warm. "Look at you cooking again, that's progress." Thomas nodded, smiled even, like nothing had changed. But everything had. Later that day, he passed the study. He wasn't trying to snoop, he was just walking by, when he heard Brad's voice over speakerphone. "We'll need to cancel the pension transfer after he's out. If he dies in the facility, it's cleaner." Emily replied like she was reading a grocery list. "I've already drafted the obit. I figured I'd save time. You know how messy grief gets." She laughed. Not nervous, not regretful, just impatient. Cremation. No ceremony, just a quiet goodbye. Thomas froze. They weren't just moving him out. They were erasing him. Before he was even gone. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that held her as a baby. That built her crib. That paid for every chapter of her life. Now they were shaking, not from fear, but from something else, something rising, something dangerous. You never think you'll hear someone plan your funeral while you're still breathing. But I did, and it changed me. Thomas sat in the garage that night. The light was off, the air was cold, and the silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was electric. His fingers traced to the edge of an old toolbox, the one he kept since 1984. It still smelled like motor oil and pine. That box had fixed broken doors, leaking pipes, and once, even a neighbor's failing marriage. But now, it would hold something else. A plan. He thought about confronting them. Right there. Screaming, shaming, kicking them out. But no, that's what they'd expect. An old man's panic. A final outburst before fading into a bed at Silver Pines. Thomas wasn't going to fade. He was going to watch, and record, and wait. Because when people think you're deaf, they speak freely. Too freely. That's when you hear what they really are. The next morning, he smiled at Emily. "Could you write down today's meds for me, sweetheart? I forgot the dosage again." She scribbled it on a sticky note, not even looking up. "Of course, Dad." He tucked the note in his pocket next to a tiny voice recorder. They think silence is weakness, but sometimes silence is strategy. 2 days later, Thomas told Emily he was going for a walk. "Clear my head," he said. "Doctor says it's good for recovery." She barely looked up from her phone. "Don't be long. Brad's coming over to talk insurance stuff." Thomas smiled. Of course, he didn't go for a walk. He took a cab 45 minutes east to Billings to a small law office with a brass plaque. Henley and Tate, Estate and Elder Law. Robert Henley hadn't seen Thomas in 6 years. Since Margaret passed. "Tom," he blinked. "You okay?" Thomas sat down. Hands calm, eyes sharp. "I need to update my will, Rob. Everything goes to Ethan. My son. Not Emily. Not a cent." There was silence, then a sigh. "Want to tell me why?" Thomas pulled out a tiny flash drive labeled in faded handwriting, "What they said when I was deaf." Robert plugged it in. He listened. His face dropped. Lines in his forehead tightened like old concrete. "Jesus Christ." Thomas leaned forward. "She's planning to put me in a home. Take the house, my pension, everything. This is criminal." "No," Thomas whispered. "This is strategic." They spent 2 hours drafting a new will, adding protections, assigning power of attorney to Ethan, a son who lived modestly in Minnesota, who never asked for anything. When Thomas walked out of that office, he didn't feel like a victim. He felt like a builder again, brick by brick, layer by layer. He was building their downfall. They built a plan to erase me. So I drew up blueprints to outlive them. Thomas wasn't a tech guy, but he built bridges. He understood structure and the importance of foundation. So when it came to revenge, he started from the ground up. He went online late one night when Emily had fallen asleep on the couch, half a glass of red wine still in her hand. Amazon, same-day delivery, a pack of micro voice recorders, each no larger than a paperclip. By noon the next day, he'd place them one behind the TV, another under the dining table, one in the hallway vent, and the last tucked inside an old teddy bear in the guest room. The same bear Emily used to carry everywhere, poetic in a cruel way. He didn't need hours of recording, just patterns, tone, intent. And what he got was worse than he imagined. Did he sign the healthcare proxy almost? I told him it was a prescription consent. Good. Once the house is in our name, we're out. Brad's voice. Maybe we should speed this up. He looks fine. Judges don't buy mild dementia anymore. Laughter. You want me to push him down the stairs, Brad? Silence, then another laugh. Colder. Thomas replayed it 5 times. Not to convince himself. To remember the sound. The sound of his daughter joking about killing him. She didn't say it seriously, but that's the thing about cruelty, it hides best inside jokes. Dr. Martin Alcott owed Thomas a favor. Years ago, when Martin's foundation was collapsing literally, Thomas redesigned the entire support structure free of charge. Now, Thomas was calling in that favor. He asked Emily to drive him to a routine checkup. She was too busy. Just take an Uber, Dad. I'll cover it. Perfect. He arrived at the clinic quietly, sat in the waiting room like any old man. But his mind wasn't waiting. It was working. Dr. Alcott walked in. Thomas, been a long time. I need a full cognitive eval. Today. The doctor blinked. You're not showing signs. But she's saying I am. She's trying to put me away, Martin. She wants control. Thomas slid the flash drive across the desk. That's everything. You'll hear it for yourself. Alcott plugged it in, listened. And when he looked up, his eyes were different. Sharper, heavier. I'll run the tests. We'll certify you competent. Legally, medically, unequivocally. They spent 2 hours running evaluations. Memory recall, reasoning, reflexes. Thomas passed every one. At the end, Alcott handed him a sealed envelope. This report goes directly to the county office. If they try anything, you're protected. Thomas stood. His legs ached, his back throbbed. But his spine, straight as steel. They wanted a man declared incompetent. Instead, they gave him time to get dangerous. Back at home, Thomas moved through the house like a shadow. Polite, quiet, predictable. Emily didn't suspect a thing. She thought he was fading again. You seem tired lately, Dad. Maybe it's time we looked at Silver Pines. Thomas nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. It might be time. He smiled. And for the first time, Emily looked relieved. Brad came over that night. They toasted with wine in the kitchen, talking like conquerors of some hidden war. Thomas sat on the couch, muted, still, but inside. He was counting, not backwards, forward, to a date, to a minute, to a moment. All the documents were ready. The new will, the medical competency certification, the voice recordings, even the surveillance footage, courtesy of a friend from his construction days who now worked security systems for the state police. Thomas had every angle covered. He just needed to wait for one more push, one final act of greed. He didn't have to wait long. The next morning, Emily left a document on the table. Just sign here, Dad. It's for emergency medical releases, standard stuff. He picked up the pen, paused, looked at her, really looked, and then signed. With a date, a very specific date. the date the lawyer would send the entire case file to the district attorney's office and to Ethan. They thought they were pushing me toward the grave, but all this time, I was digging theirs. Wednesday, 10:00 a.m., exactly 7 days after he signed the papers. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea. Emily came down the stairs dressed in business black. Brad followed, buttoning his shirt, smug as ever. "We'll be back around 4, she said. "Silver Pines has a final room review. They just need to meet you next week." Thomas smiled. "Sounds good, sweetheart. Take your time." The front door shut. Thomas stood, no limp, no hesitation. He pulled out his phone and hit send. 3 pre-drafted emails launched simultaneously. To the district attorney, full recordings and documents. To his lawyer to trigger the will update and power of attorney. To Ethan, subject line: "You were always the better child." Then he waited. Not more than an hour passed before the sirens echoed down the street. 2 black state vehicles, unmarked. Emily and Brad stood frozen on the driveway. A pair of officers stepped out. "Emily Reed, Bradley Carson. You're under investigation for conspiracy to defraud, elder abuse, and attempted medical coercion." Emily laughed nervously. "What he's not, well, he's—" Then she turned and saw Thomas, standing tall, next to Ethan, holding the teddy bear, the one with the recorder inside. He pressed play. "You want me to push him down the stairs, Brad?" The officer didn't flinch. He just pulled out the cuffs. "They tried to bury me, but forgot I was the one holding the shovel." 3 weeks later, the house was quiet. No footsteps down the hall, no whispering behind doors, no false smiles over coffee. Just peace. Emily was out on bail pending charges of elder abuse, attempted fraud, and coercion. Her nursing license was suspended indefinitely. Her face appeared on local news. Twice, Brad disappeared. No one knew where he went. Not that Thomas cared. What mattered now was Ethan. He arrived a day after the arrests. No cameras, no lectures, just a tired son, with tear-filled eyes and calloused hands. They sat on the porch that evening, watching the Montana sun bleed orange into the trees. Ethan broke the silence first. "I'm sorry I wasn't around more, Dad." Thomas didn't answer at first. Then he whispered, "You were never absent. You just never asked for anything." That silence, that kind of silence, meant healing. Later, they went through the attic. Boxes filled with memories. Letters, photos, Emily's old drawings. Some made Thomas smile. Some he burned. Not out of hatred, but because ashes can't lie, and sometimes you have to let the fire finish what betrayal started. That night, Thomas updated the deed. The house would go to Ethan. No secrets, no manipulations, just honesty. And if Ethan ever had children, he hoped they'd carry more than the name. They'd carry the lesson. Blood isn't what makes you family. Loyalty is. The envelope arrived on a Monday. No return address, just her name scrawled in familiar heavy strokes. Emily Reed. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside, a single page, handwritten. No Dear Emily. No signature at the bottom. Just words. "You called me a burden. I suppose I was the kind that built your house, paid your tuition, held your hand through 3 breakups, and stood in the rain on your wedding day because you forgot to bring an umbrella. You said I was losing my mind, but it was never my mind that was fading. It was your memory of who I am and what I've given. You joked about pushing me down the stairs. I laughed once, too. The day you took your first steps. Back then, I thought I was raising a daughter. Turns out I was only lending love to someone who saw it as a transaction. You won't go to prison for long. You're too pretty, too clever. But time doesn't only punish the guilty, it exposes them. And when the world forgets what you've done, I won't." I've changed the locks, the deed, the will, the story. There is no home here for you anymore. Not because I hate you, but because I finally remembered how to love myself." She read it twice, then dropped it on the cold steel table. For the first time, Emily couldn't cry, because tears require regret, and regret requires soul. Winter came early that year. Snow dusted the porch steps. The old wind chimes Margaret's favorite swayed gently in the Montana breeze. Thomas sat in his rocking chair, a thick blanket over his knees, Ethan reading beside him. No noise, no arguments, just pages turning, and the soft hum of peace. A bird landed on the railing. A robin, red-breasted, brave. Thomas smiled. "Your mom used to say those were messengers," he whispered. Ethan looked up. "What's the message today?" Thomas didn't answer. Instead, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and listened, not for betrayal, not for lies behind doors, but for the sound of a world that no longer needed defending. Wind in the pines, snow melting off the roof, laughter from a neighbor's child, no footsteps plotting, no whispers scheming, only life unfiltered, only truth undistorted, only silence earned. In the distance, church bells rang. Once, twice. He opened his eyes, looked at Ethan. "Do me a favor," he said softly. "Don't spend your love on those who count you as credit." Ethan nodded. Later that evening, Thomas reached into his drawer, pulled out the hearing aids, the ones he no longer needed to hear the lies. He placed them in a box, closed it, locked it, and left it there, as a reminder, not of what he lost, but of what he reclaimed. The last sound he chose to hear was peace. Not every war is fought with fists, not every victory needs applause. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is choosing to heal when they expected you to break. Thomas never raised his voice. He never begged, never cursed. He just listened. And in that silence he found clarity. He learned that being a burden isn't about age. It's about being around people who no longer see your worth. He gave, he forgave. Until one day he remembered forgiveness is not permission, and love without respect is not love at all. This was never just about inheritance or power of attorney or who signed what. It was about dignity. The dignity of a man who built a life, raised a daughter, buried a wife, and nearly buried himself under the weight of undeserved guilt. But he rose. He rose not to destroy her, but to remind her that you don't get to betray someone and still call it love. There's a kind of silence that echoes louder than shouting. And Thomas chose that silence not because he had no more to say, but because everything that mattered had already been heard by those who cared and those who would remember. You can lose everything money, home, family, but if you keep your self-respect, you've already won. Maybe you've been there too, sitting at a table where your presence felt inconvenient, living in a house that no longer felt like home, hearing whispers, not words, and realizing they stopped seeing you long before they stopped speaking to you. If this story reminded you of something buried or someone forgotten, maybe it's time to remember one thing. You are not a burden, not because you give, not because you stay silent, but because your existence has weight, and that weight deserves to be carried with love, not resentment. If you've ever had to choose between being kind and being used, this story was for you. If you've ever loved someone who forgot how to love you back, this story was for you. If you've ever walked away not in anger but in clarity, this story was definitely for you. Now it's your turn. Tell us. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who once said, "I love you"? Have you ever taken your silence and made it your power? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear tonight. And if this story resonated, give it a like, subscribe, and stay with us for more revenge stories where dignity speaks louder than vengeance, and the quietest hearts often leave the deepest echoes. Not every ending is justice, but sometimes walking away is the most powerful sentence you'll ever deliver.